Imagine waking up one morning feeling completely at peace. Your mind is clear, your heart is steady, and your emotions are in check. But then as you go about your day, something shifts. Maybe it's a conversation that leaves you unsettled. Maybe it's a social media post that sparks comparison. Maybe it's the news cycle filled with fear and uncertainty. And suddenly that peace, it's gone. Why? Because the mind is a battlefield. And every day, whether we realize it or not, we are in a war for what we believe, how we feel, and ultimately how we live. And the battle, it begins at the gates, what we allow into our ears and our eyes, what we see and what we hear are not just passive experiences. They shape the very foundation of our thoughts, and our thoughts dictate how we feel. If you have ever struggled with negative emotions, whether it's anxiety, insecurity, or discouragement, it's not because those emotions appeared out of thin air. It's because something opened the door to them. It could have been the words spoken over you, words that made you question your worth. It could have been the images you consumed, images that made you feel like you weren't enough. It could have been the voices that replayed in your mind long after the conversation ended. The enemy of peace is not always loud. Sometimes it's subtle. It enters quietly, disguised as entertainment, disguised as harmless conversation, disguised as staying informed. But before we know it, we are carrying emotions that were never ours to carry, fighting battles that were never meant for us. This is why we must be intentional about guarding our gates. Because the moment we allow negativity in, it doesn't just sit still. It takes root, it grows, and soon it shapes how we see ourselves, how we see others, and how we see the world around us. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to believe the negative? How one critical comment can stay with you longer than 10 compliments? How one moment of bad news can outweigh an entire day of good? It's not by accident. Our minds are wired to hold on to negativity more than positivity. It's called the negativity bias. But just because it's natural doesn't mean it's beneficial. The good news is we are not powerless in this. We don't have to be victims of what we hear or see. We can take back control. It starts with awareness, being conscious of what we allow in. Because the truth is, if we don't intentionally filter what enters our gates, the world will decide for us. And the world is not designed to give us peace. It continues with discipline, choosing to be selective with the voices we listen to. Not every opinion deserves a place in your mind. Not every piece of information is meant for you. Not every conversation should be entertained. We must learn to differentiate between what builds us and what breaks us. And finally, it requires alignment. Aligning our ears and eyes with truth, with wisdom, with things that uplift rather than tear down. When we do this, we begin to shift the atmosphere of our minds. We begin to create space for clarity, for confidence, for joy. Because here's the thing, the battle for our emotions is not just about what we feel in the moment. It's about the trajectory of our lives. The thoughts we entertain today become the beliefs we hold tomorrow. The emotions we allow today determine the actions we take tomorrow. So the real question is not, why do I feel this way? The real question is, what did I allow in? And if we can change that, if we can be intentional about guarding our gates, then overcoming negative feelings is no longer an impossible battle. It becomes a victory we walk in daily. Because peace is not something we wait for, it is something we protect. And it starts with what we choose to let in. Have you ever walked into a room and immediately felt the atmosphere shift? Maybe the energy was heavy. Maybe tension filled the air, or maybe without anyone saying a word, you could just feel something wasn't right. That's because environments carry weight. They carry residue. And in the same way, so does our mind. What we feed it, it produces. What we pour in, it pours out. It's a simple principle, yet so many of us wonder why we're struggling with feelings of doubt, fear, or discouragement without ever questioning what we've been consuming. If you've ever spent hours scrolling through negative news, hearing nothing but chaos, crisis, and division, you know exactly what I mean. You don't just walk away from that the same way you came in. It lingers. It affects how you see the world, how you engage with people, and how you feel about the future. And the truth is, it's not just the news. It's the music we listen to, the conversations we entertain, the voices we allow to shape our thinking. And we tell ourselves it doesn't matter, that we're just keeping up, that it's just harmless entertainment. But is it? Because if it was harmless, why does it leave an imprint? Why do we find ourselves replaying words that were never meant to define us? Why do we find ourselves struggling with feelings that were never meant to take root in us? Because what we consume, we become. It's just like food. If you eat junk every day, your body will reflect it. You'll feel sluggish, weak, drained. You may not notice it right away, but over time, it begins to show. And our mind, our spirit, they work the same way. If all we feed them is negativity, then why are we surprised when we feel weighed down? But here's the thing. Most of the time, it's not even intentional. We don't wake up and say, today I want to fill my mind with fear. Today I want to feel small. Today I want to be anxious. No, it happens subtly, passively. We absorb what's around us without questioning its effect on us. And then we wonder why we feel the way we do. That's why we must be intentional about what enters our gates. Because our emotions are not random. They are the result of seeds that have been planted, whether we planted them on purpose or not. And if we want to change the harvest, we must first change the seeds. Think about the last time you felt encouraged, strengthened, empowered. What were you listening to? What were you watching? Who were you around? Now think about the last time you felt drained, anxious, or unworthy. What were you exposing yourself to? The connection is not a coincidence. This is why discipline matters. Because you cannot build a strong mind on a weak diet. You cannot expect confidence when you constantly feed yourself comparison. You cannot expect peace when all you consume is chaos. You cannot expect faith when you are constantly listening to fear. So, what's the solution? How do we break the cycle? We must start filtering. Not everything deserves access. Not every conversation is for us. Not every voice should have influence. And before we engage with something, we need to ask, is this feeding my soul or draining it? Is this building my faith or breaking it? Is this aligning with who I am called to be, or is it distracting me from it? Because the moment we start filtering, we take back control. We stop being victims of what we consume and start being curators of it. We become gatekeepers instead of passive recipients. And over time, we begin to see the shift. We begin to notice that we are more at peace, not because life got easier, but because we stopped allowing unnecessary noise to disrupt our spirit. We begin to see our confidence grow, not because the world became kinder, but because we stopped feeding ourselves messages that made us question our worth. We begin to walk in clarity, not because we have all the answers, but because we finally cleared out the voices that were drowning out wisdom. And when we do that, we realize that overcoming negative feelings was never about fighting them head on. It was about changing what we allow in. Because if garbage goes in, garbage will come out. But if we feed our minds with truth, with wisdom, with things that strengthen us, then peace, clarity, and confidence will follow. Not by accident, not by luck, but by choice. Have you ever had a moment where your emotions felt so overwhelming that it seemed like they were running the show? Maybe you were hurt by someone's words, and that hurt turned into resentment. Maybe fear crept in, and before you knew it, it dictated your decisions. Maybe discouragement set in, and suddenly you questioned everything about yourself. It's in moments like these that we have to remind ourselves of a simple yet powerful truth. Emotions are messengers, not masters. They are indicators, not dictators. They tell us what's happening inside, but they don't have the authority to define us or determine our actions unless we let them. Too often, we treat emotions as if they hold absolute truth. If we feel afraid, we assume we are in danger. If we feel rejected, we assume we are unworthy. If we feel overwhelmed, we assume we are incapable. But just because we feel something doesn't mean it's the full picture. Our emotions can be real, but they are not always right. Think about it. How many times have you felt anxious about something that never even happened? How many times have you taken offense over something that wasn't intended to harm you? How many times have you allowed one moment of disappointment to convince you that everything is falling apart? This is what happens when we let emotions lead. They magnify situations, distort reality, and keep us stuck in cycles that we were never meant to live in. But what if, instead of immediately reacting to how we feel, we paused? What if we asked ourselves, why am I feeling this way? What is this emotion trying to reveal? Because emotions don't appear out of nowhere. They come from somewhere. And when we take the time to trace them back to their source, we gain clarity. We begin to understand that the fear we feel is not about the present moment. It's about an experience from our past that we haven't healed from. The insecurity we feel is not about what was said today. It's about a wound that was open years ago. The frustration we feel is not just about the situation at hand. It's about deeper expectations that weren't met. When we treat emotions as messengers instead of masters, we take back control. We stop reacting impulsively and we start responding intentionally. We stop being driven by feelings and we start being led by wisdom. But let's be clear. This doesn't mean we ignore our emotions. It doesn't mean we suppress them and pretend they don't exist. That's not strength. Strength is acknowledging what we feel without allowing it to dictate our choices. Strength is giving ourselves permission to process emotions without being consumed by them. Strength is recognizing that our feelings are valid, but they are not always the best guide for our future. So how do we do this? How do we overcome negative emotions without ignoring them or being controlled by them? We start by shifting our perspective. Instead of seeing emotions as problems, we start seeing them as opportunities. Opportunities to learn, to grow, to heal. Every emotion carries insight. Anger can reveal where our boundaries have been crossed. Sadness can reveal where healing is needed. Anxiety can reveal where trust must be built. When we stop fighting against our emotions and start listening to what they are trying to tell us, we gain power over them. Then we choose truth over feelings. Because feelings fluctuate, but truth remains. If we allow emotions to be the foundation of our decisions, we will always be unstable. But when we anchor ourselves in truth, when we remind ourselves of who we are, what we are called to, and what is real beyond what we feel, we step into stability. And finally, we practice discipline. Emotional maturity doesn't happen overnight. It's a daily practice. It's catching ourselves in moments of reaction and choosing response instead. It's recognizing patterns of negative thinking and redirecting them before they take root. It's filtering the voices we allow to influence us so that our emotions are shaped by truth rather than noise. Because at the end of the day, emotions will always be a part of us, but they don't have to control us. They don't have to define us, and they don't have to hold us back from the life we are meant to live. We are meant to feel. But we are also meant to lead our emotions, not be led by them. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to remember the one negative thing someone said about you? Even if you've heard 100 compliments, how a single bad experience can replay in your mind for days while the good moments seem to fade into the background? It's not just in your head, it's how the brain is wired. Our minds are naturally inclined to hold on to negativity more than positivity. It's called the negativity bias. And while it may have served a purpose in survival, helping us remember dangers and avoid threats, it doesn't always serve us in daily life. Because if we're not careful, we end up reinforcing thoughts that don't serve us. We allow fear, doubt, and insecurity to take root. And before we know it, they shape the way we see ourselves, the way we see others, and the way we move through life. But here's the good news. Just as our minds can be wired to hold on to negativity, they can also be rewired to focus on truth, peace, and confidence. It doesn't happen automatically. It's a process, and it requires intentionality, but it is possible. And it starts with realizing that we don't have to accept every thought that enters our mind. How many times have we allowed a single doubt to derail our confidence? How many times have we let an anxious thought convince us that the worst is bound to happen? How many times have we rehearsed rejection before it even occurred? These thoughts come, but the problem is not that they come. It's that we agree with them. We adopt them as truth. We repeat them to ourselves. We give them space to grow. But what if we stopped treating every thought as truth and started questioning it? What if instead of immediately believing the negative, we ask ourselves, is this true? Is this helpful? Does this align with who I am and who I am becoming? Because if it doesn't, then it doesn't belong. This is where the work of rewiring begins. It's the process of replacing negative thoughts with truth, of taking every thought captive before it takes us captive. It's about breaking the habit of automatically accepting the worst case scenario and instead choosing to focus on what is real, what is good, and what is possible. But let's be honest, this isn't easy. It's not just about thinking positively. It's about building a new mental framework, and that requires discipline. Because for years, many of us have unknowingly trained our minds to expect disappointment, to prepare for rejection, to hold on to criticism longer than we hold on to encouragement. That's a pattern. And patterns don't break on their own. They have to be intentionally disrupted. This is why what we consistently feed our minds matters. If we spend our days absorbing negativity, we can't expect to produce peace. If we dwell on our past failures, we can't expect to move forward in confidence. If we constantly compare ourselves to others, we can't expect to feel content with our own journey. Our thoughts follow what we focus on. So if we want to change our mindset, we have to change our inputs. Think about it. If we want to build physical strength, we train our bodies. We don't go to the gym once and expect instant results. We do it daily, consistently, pushing ourselves even when it's uncomfortable. The same applies to our minds. We don't rewire our thinking with a single positive affirmation. We do it through repetition. Through choosing every day to reject lies and embrace truth, to challenge fear instead of submitting to it, to focus on solutions instead of being consumed by problems. And over time, the shift happens. What once felt automatic, doubt, fear, insecurity, starts to lose its grip. The thoughts that used to control us no longer have the same power. Not because they stopped coming, but because we stopped agreeing with them. This is what it means to rewire rather than just react. It's the difference between living at the mercy of every thought that enters our minds and choosing to take authority over them. Because our thoughts create our reality. And when we learn to reshape them, we don't just overcome negativity, we step into a life of clarity, confidence, and peace. There's a reason words are so powerful. A single sentence can change the course of someone's life. A single conversation can plant a seed that grows for years. And the words we repeat to ourselves, they shape everything. Our mindset, our confidence, our decisions, and ultimately our future. If we take a moment to reflect, we'll realize that many of the beliefs we hold about ourselves didn't start with us. They were introduced through words. Maybe it was something a teacher said when we were young, something a parent spoke in frustration, or something a friend joked about that stuck deeper than they realized. Maybe it was a repeated message from culture telling us who we should be, what we should have achieved by now, or how we should measure our worth. And over time, these words became the script we lived by. But here's the problem. When we don't examine the words that have shaped us, we end up living out narratives that were never meant for us. We find ourselves limited, not by reality, but by beliefs we never questioned. We carry insecurities that don't belong to us. We shrink ourselves in spaces where we were meant to stand tall. We settle for less because somewhere along the way, words convinced us that we weren't capable of more. But what if we stopped and asked, whose voice am I still carrying? Whose words have shaped my self-perception? And most importantly, are those words true? Because if they are not, then they do not belong. This is why we must be intentional about the words we allow to take root in our minds. Not just the words spoken by others, but the words we speak to ourselves. Because words don't just describe reality, they create it. What we consistently tell ourselves determines how we show up in the world. If we keep saying, I'm not enough, we will live as if that's true, even when it isn't. If we keep saying, things never work out for me, we will subconsciously sabotage opportunities, reinforcing the very thing we fear. If we keep saying, I'll always struggle with this, we will never step into the discipline and growth required to overcome it. But the good news is, just as words can tear down, they can also build up. Just as they can create limits, they can create freedom. And the moment we become intentional about the language we use, everything begins to shift. This is why we must not only reject the words that don't align with truth, but we must also replace them. It's not enough to say, I don't want to think negatively. We have to decide, what will I think instead? Because transformation doesn't come from just removing the wrong voices. It comes from amplifying the right ones. This requires discipline. Because for so long, many of us have been fluent in self-doubt. We have rehearsed negative words so often that they feel natural, while words of truth and confidence feel foreign. But that's not because they aren't real, it's because they haven't been practiced. And the only way to change that is through repetition. Through catching ourselves when we speak words of fear and choosing in that moment to replace them with words of faith. Through identifying the lies we've believed and intentionally breaking agreement with them. Through choosing words that build rather than words that break, not just for others, but for ourselves. Because the words we speak to ourselves in private will always be more powerful than the words anyone else speaks to us in public. And when we start speaking the right words, we start walking in the right identity, not an identity shaped by fear, by insecurity, or by past wounds, but by truth, by clarity, by the certainty that we are not defined by old narratives, but by the words we choose to believe today. So the real question is, what words are you living by? Because if we can change the words, we can change the outcome. There comes a moment in life when we have to decide who we want to be, not based on our past, not based on our circumstances, not even based on what others expect from us, but based on the truth of who we were always meant to be. That decision is not made in one grand moment. It's made in the small, everyday choices of what we allow to shape us. Because the reality is we are always being shaped by something. Whether we realize it or not, the things we dwell on, the voices we listen to, the habits we cultivate, they are forming us. And if we are not intentional about shapes us, then we will become a reflection of whatever is most present, not necessarily what is most true. This is why guarding our ear and eye gates is not about restriction, it's about freedom. It's about recognizing that not everything is worth our attention. Not every opinion deserves space in our minds. Not every distraction is harmless. Some things may seem small, but over time they build into patterns. And patterns create pathways. And those pathways lead to either strength or struggle, clarity or confusion, growth or stagnation. So the question is, what are we allowing to shape us? Are we exposing ourselves to things that reinforce doubt, insecurity, and fear? Or are we surrounding ourselves with what builds faith, confidence, and purpose? Because whatever we consistently feed ourselves will determine what we become. And let's be honest, it's not always easy to make the right choices. Sometimes it's tempting to indulge in conversations we know aren't beneficial. Sometimes it feels harmless to engage in things that we know don't align with our values. Sometimes we convince ourselves that we can handle the negativity, the toxicity, the doubt without it affecting us. But little by little, it does. Little by little, it seeps into our thinking. Little by little, it influences how we see ourselves and the world around us. This is why discipline matters. Because transformation isn't accidental, it's intentional. It's deciding every day to be mindful of what we allow in. It's choosing to remove what doesn't serve us, even when it's comfortable. It's recognizing that true change doesn't just happen in moments of inspiration. It happens in the daily practice of protecting our peace, our It means being mindful of what we consume, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. It means filtering what we allow into our minds, asking, does this align with truth? Does this build or does it break? Does this move me forward or keep me stuck? And if the answer is anything other than growth, peace, or clarity, then it is not worth our attention. This is not about living in fear of what's around us. It's about living in awareness of what's shaping us. Because when we are aware, we can make better choices. We can intentionally surround ourselves with voices that speak life. We can cultivate habits that strengthen rather than drain us. We can create an environment that supports the person we are becoming. And when we do this, everything changes. Because suddenly, we are no longer living at the mercy of whatever the world throws at us. We are no longer absorbing negativity by default. We are no longer allowing distractions to derail our purpose. Instead, we are walking in clarity, in confidence, in alignment with who we were always meant to be. Because at the end of the day, transformation is not about one big moment. It's about what we choose to allow in day after day, moment after moment. And when we guard what matters, we protect who we are becoming.